Hello, everybody. My name is Jackson, footed over here, retail manager at Fossil Creek Nursery. I starting up here, really excited about today. Glad to be back teaching the classes again. Today's class is all about hardening off your plants to get ready to grow them out this summer. Now, we could be talking here maybe about vegetables, herbs that you started seeds inside for. They could be houseplants that you've kept outside for a prolonged period of time and now are finally, or inside, I apologize, and finally bringing them outside. It could be things like other kinds of seeds. If you started woody plants inside during the winter, it was too cold to bring them out because they were just seedlings. But today is about taking those things that we've started inside, have been keeping inside for months on end, and finally transitioning them into the outside environment here in the Front Range of Colorado. So, to start, I would like to kind of address just a couple of the main plants that we will be taking outside this season, just overall, and then we'll delve a little bit more into specifics about each individual one. So first and foremost, the most common plants that we harden off are going to be our herbs and vegetables. This could be anything from warm season vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, to even cool season stuff like lettuce and kale. Those actually could have been outside a little bit earlier, but we'll talk about those two groupings a little bit separately. For right now, I'm going to talk mostly about our peppers, our tomatoes, and some of those other our warm season plants. Corn is another great example. But to start, it's important to know that these specific plants are not going to be able to live through a hard freeze or any kind of freeze that would be, of course, below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. So let's talk about our tomatoes at first. Generally, seeds for tomatoes, peppers, corn, those things would have been started back in maybe February, beginning of March if you were a little bit later, or if you were an overachiever, you might have even started them in January. But at this point in time, we are getting to the season where things are going to stay consistently warm, and our nighttime temperatures are only going to be in maybe the low to mid 40s, which is a very safe distance away from our 32 degrees and would not allow those warm season plants to have any adverse effects outside. They wouldn't freeze, they wouldn't get nipped by anything. If there's a high wind chill, it would still be fairly safe too. But it is important to know how to transition those outside. So many people may have a setup which you have a grow light that has been providing most of the requirement there for the past month or two. Some of you may have kept your plants right up against a window to start those seeds, and some people may have even had an enclosed area in which they can manipulate the humidity and other environmental factors for that seed process. So, again, starting with tomatoes here, many of them, thank you very much, many of them are going to be a good size at the moment. They'll be 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 8 inches tall at this point, and they may be outgrowing the grow light that they have previously been feeding off of. They may be putting off secondary leaves. They may be having more hardened off leaves. Darker green is generally a good sign that things are starting to harden off, as well as the texture of the leaf itself. They're no longer fleshy and limp. They are more turgid, firm, and they are also going to be ready for the environment. But to go from an enclosed area with manipulated environmental conditions right outside is going to be a huge stress for these plants. Not only because of the heat, not only because of the wind outside, the airflow, not because of the temperature, but also just the intensity of the environment. Inside, in those grow beds, in those trays, underneath the light, things stay fairly, I would say, consistent. Again, we can manipulate those factors. We can say this is going to stay 70 degrees and it's going to have a humidity of 70 to 80%, and it's going to get light for exactly 12 hours underneath this grow light. To take something like that and to bring it directly out into the sun would end up being detrimental to the plant. That would be like living in Florida for years on end and then jumping up to Alaska in -40 just the very next day. So it's important to know that these plants cannot survive on their own out there. We need to transition and acclimate them to that environment. So to start with light, I keep mentioning about these grow lights having specific times and conditions. Outside, once we start to transition them out, we're going to need to provide a little bit more shade. Of course, as many of you know, and as I've mentioned in these classes before, the UV in the Front Range of Colorado here is intense. The sun is very intense. We are higher in elevation than maybe many other parts of the country, and is a product of that, we may not have um, the best growing conditions for throwing things right outside. It is important to not only allow those plants to go outside in smaller increments of time, but if you are starting to transition them outside, you want to provide some sort of cloth or covering that will hopefully omit some of the intense rays that are approaching the plant itself. Now, there's a couple ways of doing this. The first thing you can do is keep plants outside for an hour or two at a time, a couple days a week, to try and get them used to the environment out there, bringing them inside, of course, after about an hour or two of them being exposed to the elements outside. The other option would be to pick a side of your house that has a little bit less intense of a sun, maybe a bright north side or an east-facing side of your house that would only get morning sun, keeping it outside there for a couple hours, bringing it inside once that sun goes away, or even for a couple hours after if there's no direct sunlight on the plant. Now, if your house or apartment or wherever you live, if it's west facing or south facing, the generally more intense sides of the house for heat and UV, and generally having longer periods of sunlight, you're going to want to make sure that you have some sort of cloth or covering, like I mentioned. Now, the most common thing to use is going to be something like this. You may not be able to read it. This is frost cloth right here. Now, frost cloth can also be used for plants that have just been put outside that are still fleshy for below zero temperatures. However, things like this will allow just enough sunlight through where the plant can, again, acclimate, transition, get used to that new UV, but not be as intense or detrimental first go at it. So again, if you have a west or south facing side of your house that is extremely intense with sunlight and heat, you can purchase some type of frost cloth, or even if you have a faded sheet, you could poke a couple holes in that and lay it not necessarily on top, but at an angle facing that is parallel to the sun, and you keep your plants underneath that. If you provide that environment with the frost cloth, shading those plants for a week or two, keeping those plants outside, making sure they're staying watered, and of course keeping an eye on the temperature, that things aren't dropping below, I would say, 38 to 35 degrees, you'll be in good shape. So again, that is a really great addition to hardening off plants, getting them used to the new environmental conditions, is frost cloth. It's going to help protect from those intense UV rays. Now, there are other conditions that you also want to keep in mind when you're hardening off. Not just the sun, not just the light, but also, as I've mentioned, the cold itself. If we're having a borderline day, you're checking the weather and you see, ooh, it's going to be maybe 39, 38, 36 degrees tonight, and you're not sure, it might get a little bit colder, you can definitely prepare for that. There's many different ways to do that. If it's small plants that you've just sown into the beds themselves, you can put bags over it, sheets over it, give it some sort of cover, and definitely make sure that that plant is watered. Having plants under more wet, moist conditions are going to allow for a easier I would say, reaction to colder temperatures. And that is because the process of water freezing is a exothermic condition, meaning that, or reaction, meaning that it's releasing heat as it's freezing, which will actually help to insulate and raise the temperature around the plant itself. This is a technique used a lot of times in production for woody plants, perennials, greenhouses that have, and places that have a longer winter, they will have large barrels of water, or they'll spray down their greenhouse when they know there's going to be a hard freeze. And as it's freezing, it will increase the humidity and also increase the temperature in the general area, keeping things a little bit happier. The worst thing that we can do is allow a plant to dry out and then freeze. That's not going to allow any insulation on the roots. It's not going to allow any humidity to be present, which could also very much help protect plants from freezes. And finally, it will also maintain a healthy and well-watered plant. So making sure that you have a watered plant and that you're able to get some bag, some sort of cloth, a covering over those plants to make sure that they're not getting hit by wind, which could also help catalyze some of the transpiration, evaporation that's happening on the plant. You don't want it losing water, and it's also going to help hold heat. And if you were to put a bag cloth, something over the plant while it was still warm out during the day, you could hopefully capture some of that heat underneath the cloth bag or whatever structure you're putting there. So when we transition into nighttime, we get those cold temperatures, there's still latent heat that may be available. There are other options as well. There are more professional types of frost cloths and protections here. These can be different kinds of fabrics. They could be more cotton. Sometimes this one specifically is a very similar fabric to those that you will see in a hospital used for gowns, which is great because it still allows a little bit of airflow. It's a dark color, so it can absorb heat and light, but it's not going to be very heavy. You do not want an extremely heavy covering over your new plants, because remember, we started these seeds inside. They are small, they are fleshy, they're not going to be great to just throw right out into these conditions. And also, if we put something heavy on top of them, we don't want any new growth or any new stems to be broken or damaged in any kind of way. So make sure whatever you're putting over it, again, great example here is a more than likely dark fabric, which can obtain and hold that heat and light, as well as keep some of that the pressure and weight off of those plants themselves. Another great addition to having some of your newly fleshy and vulnerable plants outside, you can purchase other kinds of protectors. This one right here is specific for tomatoes, but it can work on any other small plants outside. This is essentially a plastic ring that has many tubes around it. Now these tubes you can fill up with water, and much like I was talking about earlier with those greenhouses where propagators will fill up big barrels and keep them in the greenhouse or wet down the floors in the greenhouse, the intention here is that as you fill up these tubes and it gets frozen over time, and we get those below zero temperatures, the water in there will start to freeze. And as the water freezes, again, an exothermic reaction, it is releasing heat and trapping heat right around our plant right here. Now, we of course have a bunch of this stuff in the store. At this point in time, we're looking at some pretty good temperatures. We're looking kind of low 40s, mid 40s, but it is the Front Range of Colorado, and we can expect things to change in an instant. So it's important to know what you're supposed to be doing to harden off. So we talked a little bit about the light. I'd like to delve a little bit more into that. And we talked about frost protection as part as hardening off. You also want to keep in mind a couple other factors. I keep mentioning that we started all of these plants in very specific, controlled, and manipulated conditions. We have more than likely a closet area, a room, a garage, where you have your furnace, your AC, set to a very specific temperature as the day continues. Again, getting a very specific amount of light, amount of humidity. Once you start to change these conditions, it will take a couple weeks for your newly planted and sown plants to adapt to the ever-changing conditions outside. And this is important to know because once you put a plant in the ground, say that it's in a great place, you've already hardened it off from light, and you don't have any worries about freezing, it may lose a couple leaves because of the stress of changing, not only of messing up those roots and scratching those up when you dig the plant in the hole, but also the idea that we're going from a controlled environment to a very drastic and ever-changing environment. So there may be stress there. You may lose some leaves. You may not see the plant grow very well until it has started rooting into the new area. And don't be alarmed by this. This is totally natural and normal. There are certain plants that you may not want to stress out as much and may not transplant as well, some of which would be some of your cucumberates like squash, cucumber, my goodness, what else, zucchinis as well. Things like that would also be very good to keep in mind, that it wouldn't necessarily... There we go. Just got a call. Also, carrots. Carrots are another one that you don't necessarily want to mess up the root system too much of, because of course the carrot is the root and it's holding a lot of energy. You don't want to disrupt that very much. But anyway, it is important to know that you're not doing anything wrong if the plants go under stress, especially if you're allowing for protection during cold temperatures and acclimating outside for a week or two, just to make sure that those plants are not getting burned by the sun outside. And that is a very common thing that we'd see, regardless if it's a vegetable or a house plant that you're deciding to put outside. These things can get burned. Again, UV is much more intense here than it is in other places in the country, other places in the world. So if you took something that has been outside for a long period, inside for a long period of time, threw it right outside, not only are you going to stress out the plant, dry it out immensely, and have the wind and just desiccating air pull water from the plant, you're also going to see that you'll get bronzing, burning on those leaves. That is a great reason, again, why we're using hardening off techniques like a couple hours a day, outside, bring that plant inside for the nighttime, bring it inside after it's been in the sun for a couple hours, or even using, again, our frost cloth. Frost cloth is also a really great cold temperature protection as well, but there are, of course, many options there, some that you can do yourself. So let's talk a little bit more about houseplants. We've kind of gone over our warm season vegetables and how to acclimate those with light and cold temperatures. Again, we want to be careful. We're not doing anything too crazy if we're getting below about 35 degrees. And if we are, making sure that we have our correct preparation for that. But let's talk a little bit about houseplants. There are many people that don't have front yards, backyards, that have these plants inside that are tropical. They couldn't have survived outside during the winter, and now we're hoping to transition them back outside into the environment to keep for the summer. Very similar circumstances here. These plants have become used to and acclimated to the artificial lighting that you have in your home, whether it be a grow light, some type of fluorescent LED. Also, it is getting used to the conditions it's been given from your furnace as well. This is very dry, forced air. It's not going to be humid, which is a less intense transition going outside here in Colorado, but it's important to know. Also, your plants have been getting used to and have been acclimating to less light per day, especially if you don't have any artificial lighting. If your houseplants have been pushed up against a window, or their main source of light has been some sort of indirect light from outside, since we are beginning to have longer days, you'll notice those plants are also going to want to start pushing out more growth. Houseplants, even though they are tropical and naturally and natively close to the equator, are still going to react to seasonal changes, much like anything out here would, deciduous, coniferous, otherwise. So you got to keep in mind that these tropical houseplants that have been getting either artificial, indirect, or kind of partial direct light through a window, these are also going to need a couple hours outside per day, but not any more than that for the first couple weeks. We do not want to just start burning them, throwing them directly outside. You're going to have adverse effects. You're going to have burning leaves, and things are going to desiccate much quicker than they would have if they were just kept inside. Again, because we're taking it from a very controlled environment, putting it out into the just various conditions outside. So we can use similar techniques there. Bring it outside for a few hours or keep it under some frost cloth. And again, this is something that you can use almost like an awning. If you had some sort of roof or you had posts that were structured up high and you could tie frost cloth up there, pull that down, shade over those plants. Essentially, we just don't want them to be directly exposed to sun for long periods of time. Keeping things shaded, keeping things warm, and making sure to just slowly acclimate over a couple weeks is how we're going to keep our plants as healthy as possible. So, to kind of recap here, cool season vegetables, which I only discussed a little bit, could have been outside for the past month here. They can handle freezing, things like sweet peas, or beans, sorry, beets, kale, lettuce, even something kind of close to, I would say, like your thymes. Those types of plants would have been fine outside, especially through a couple of these freezes. However, if you're putting them out now, we still need to make sure that we're acclimating, keeping them shaded when we first go out. Warm season crops, your corn, your tomatoes, your peppers, those are going to be your peas. Let's see here, your cucumbers, like I mentioned, some of those cucumbers, zucchinis, squashes, pumpkins even, although many people do not grow those around here, but they are a great plant and there's many places that do. So those kinds of plants will not be able to tolerate those negative or below zero temperatures or below freezing temperatures. So if we're putting them out now, again, making sure we have preparations, either some sort of water source around there that's trapping heat, releasing heat as it freezes, or we have some sort of light, preferably dark colored cloth that we can put over those plants to both trap heat and maintain it through cold minutes. And then finally, we discussed a little bit about houseplants in general and the different ways that we can acclimate them, which were very similar to the way that we can harden off some of our vegetables. Um, that is pretty much what I had for hardening off here. If anybody had any questions as far as specific plants, or if they had specific ideas, questions, or they were noticing that they were having trouble doing specific hardening off techniques, please throw them in the comments now. I'd love to answer those. Also, if you guys are curious about just the conditions of outside plants, things that have been outside, and how those are transitioning and growing, breaking dormancy now, I would also be very happy to answer any of that. But this isn't necessarily going to be a long class. It's just important to know that things will need some time to acclimate, transition, and harden off, going from a controlled environment out to the great outdoors here, especially in the very intense conditions in Colorado. And I mean, keep in mind, guys, the Front Range of Colorado, if there were no people here, there would not be trees. We have a couple native trees that are truly native, peach leaf willow, a couple cottonwoods, which are more naturalized than truly native, and they would only be growing around water sources. It is difficult to grow things around here. Anybody who has successfully grown shrubs, perennials, trees outside, they should congratulate themselves. It is not very easy doing things around here, and quite frankly, it takes a lot of technique. Everything from our soils to the intense UV to the wind intensity to the lack of moisture is creating these barriers, these obstacles for us to have great gardens. So it is not an easy task. And again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to throw those in the comments. I'd be happy to answer that. But I'll wait a minute or two here and then probably say we're good. Yeah. I like recording down here more. It's less of an angle, and I think it really accentuates my jawline. Final thoughts here. Well, I'm not seeing too many questions here in the comment, guys. If you do have anything, feel free to call the store, Fossil Creek Nursery, 970-226 oh my goodness, 4924. That's it. There's multiple 226 numbers here. And if that's going to be it, I appreciate everybody that was here. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks, guys.